right, I'm tired and grumpy.
Oh no. You're not grumpy. No.
Do you spend time with your dog bed with you? Or she just sat
Yeah,
there?
well, we normally sort of tether her, so she's got her lead under a chair or something.
Oh yeah.
She can't go too far. But we did must have. I think that's a mistake in hindsight.
Nice. It's exactly what that's about. We're already by the bridge already. That's where the park is up there. That's where we live. So if you have to put up bus, you walk down fine. Coach, like lemonade, it's like two. Lemonade, thank you. Thank you very much.
Put your nose there.
Thank you.
Put your nose there. Crossing the line. Crossing the line.
Richard, pass the umbrella. Down there. It's not going to rain and you're under cover, look. Yes. You won't forget it. It's massive. It's just being ready for all eventualities.
Yes.
Yeah, down there. It's better than my son. You don't have to rain. It's not going to rain. I'm not going to rain. It's not an umbrella.
You just needed one for that.
Nice.
Very nice, isn't she, Jess?
Rich. Hello. Hello. You can say hello. Oh. She's very quiet, isn't she? Jess was worried because she always went up bark when you're pushing.
She's not likely to bark.
Very happy. Oh, I keep saying that's how. I keep saying that's how they talk.
Yeah.
The unpredictability there.
She
The building
does.
just coming into view now on the right-hand side is one of the gatehouses onto the private part of the
Sort of
Duke's
think when
estate.
she does bark,
There are 5 entrances onto the estate, this one being the Eccleston Ferry entrance. The grassland surrounding the house was at one time a public golf course, but worries over the increasing risk of terrorist attacks during the 1990s forced the to have it closed. Today is a deer park, home to 600 head of fallow deer. The buildings you may be able to catch a glimpse of through the trees are the Eastern Stud. The stud has a history of breeding race winners which goes back at least 250 years and includes 2 triple crown winners in 3 years, with the first two during the 1800s, as well as victories in the St. Leger, Ascot Gold Cup, Derby and 2,000 Guineas. Many famous racehorses have been stabled here, including Nijinsky and Arkle, favourite of Anne Duchess of Westminster. He began his life here before going on to win 27 races, including 3 Cheltenham Gold Cups. Another one of Anne's horses was Foynihan, who a few months after the Duchess had sold him, because his jumping was so poor and he had a tendency to fall, won turn to victory in the 1967 Grand National. Although, to be honest, it was a feat he achieved only by pure fluke. Something at the fence after Beecher's Brook spooked the pack leaders who refused to jump it. The middle markers then added to the confusion, and by the time Foynihan and the rest of the also-rans approached the fence, it was seen as total chaos, with loose horses and bewildered jockeys blocking most of the course. Somehow, Foynihan's jockey, John Buckingham, managed to steer the horse through the melee, and by the time the rest of the field had remounted to continue the race, they were 5 fences clear and couldn't be caught. They came in first at odds of 100 to 1.
Interesting to see where she put herself, Jim. She just wanted to walk.
She'll visit everyone.
She's great. You happy? You happy, Jess?
Yeah, choose. It's 7.89 price on I used to know. I've got a straw. Shall I hold it because I've got a straw? Thank you. But you want your water in the back, so it's very fizzy.
Blending more naturally with the surrounding riverside properties.
All the noise sounds.
A large modern block of luxury apartments and townhouses we're now passing is Riverside Court. Built in 1979, it replaced yet another public house, this one called the White House. From 1868, the hotel provided rowing boats for hire, and it too ran a ferry service until the onset of the Second World War. Just beyond Riverside Court and continuing for some distance along the right-hand bank, you will see a number of wooden riverside cottages. These cottages and the land upon which they stand used to belong to the large houses to the rear, but over the years, many of them have been sold off. Prices vary greatly depending on their size and quality, but are rather expensive when you consider that their owners cannot live in them, are only permitted to use them for a certain number of weeks each year, and insurance is costly due to the likelihood of flooding. Over in the distance on the left-hand side, you will soon be able to see past the city skyline. The Authorities Tower marks the position of our beautiful cathedral. In Roman times, this was the site of the Basilica of St. Paul and St. Peter, and during the Saxon occupation of the city, it became the chapel of St. Werburg. Her remains were brought to Chester in 907 and placed in a shrine in the chapel, which was home to a second college of canons. Sometime around 1090, the chapel was razed to the ground and the canons evicted. And in 1093, Hugh Lupus, also known as Hugh d'Avranches, first Norman Earl of Chester, established a Benedictine abbey on the site. At this time, Chester's cathedral was the nearby church of St. John the Baptist. But in 1541, following the dissolution of the monasteries, the Benedictine order was disbanded, the shrine of St. Werburg desecrated, and the abbey became the newly created Cathedral of Christ and the Blessed Virgin. And the last abbot, Thomas Clark, became the first dean of the new cathedral. Still in the distance, but sweeping well around to the right, you will notice a tall chimney. This is Chester's lead shot tower. It was built in the 1700s to provide lead shot, otherwise known as musket balls, primarily for use in the Napoleonic Wars. A number of such towers were built in this country around this time, but Chester's Tower and Lead Works, although now derelict, is one of the few still remaining in its entirety. You may have noticed that some time ago we've been travelling around the sweeping Oxford Heads in the river. In the 11th century, the low-lying land on the left-hand side was actually an island, known as an Isle to Rye. The land was owned by the Norman Earls, and when the last Earl died without an heir in 1237, it passed to the Crown and was eventually sold off. In 1929, the land was gifted to the people of Chester to be used in perpetuity for leisure and recreational purposes only. Today, just as in medieval times, the area is still known locally as the Earl's Eye. Returning once more to the right-hand bank, notice the large stone castle-like building set back amongst the trees. This is Walmore Hill. It was built as a retirement home of the previously mentioned Victorian architect John Douglas. As I've already mentioned, he was responsible for some 400 buildings in and around the city, but by far his most famous piece of work is the beautiful wrought ironwork which supports Chester's clock astride the East Gate. Today a symbol of Chester throughout the world, and reputedly one of the world's most photographed clocks. Building work started on Walmore Hill in 1898, but was still not quite completed at the time of Douglas's death in 1911. Over the years, Walmore Hill has seen service as a private residence, a school, and until relatively recently, the headquarters of the Cheshire Fire Service. Today, the building is split into a number of private luxury apartments. It still gets some of its supplies from this same source. Take note now of the lovely little church perched on the hill. This is the Church of St. Paul. Built in 1830, it was extensively refurbished in 1876 by the architect John Douglas, who regularly attended worship here. Between the church and the buildings below is a barely visible lane, which goes by the strange name of Barrowwell Hill. For an explanation of this name, we need to cast our minds back to medieval times and the practice of witchcraft. Ladies under suspicion were brought to the head of the lane and tied into a barrel, which was then bowled down the hill into the river. If the lady drowned, she was deemed to be innocent and on her way to heaven. However, should she survive, she was declared guilty of witchcraft, hauled from the barrel and dragged away in chains to await her execution. Now look out for an overgrown and cultivated piece of land. This is Gallows Hill, and is the place where for 200 years these and more general executions were carried out. The last one being on Saturday the 9th of May 1801, when three men, Samuel Thompson and John Morgan, professional criminals convicted of issuing counterfeit banknotes, and John Clare, a young man in his early 20s sentenced for petty burglary, were brought here in chains to await hanging. A huge crowd had gathered to witness the end of an era, and as the cart carrying the three men neared the fatal tree, the press of people forced it to a halt, and Clare, who had several times declared that he was not born to be hanged, leapt off the back, and though hampered by the irons on his legs, managed to break through the crowd. From the top of Gallows Hill, he hurtled down the slope and half running, half tumbling, plunged into the Dee, where inevitably he drowned. Clare's lifeless body was brought out of the river about 20 minutes later, and in the most brutal fashion, according to the Chester Chronicle, was strung up and turned off with the others. The city sheriffs knew their duty. The law had decreed that Clare should be hanged by the neck, and dead or alive, hanged by the neck he was going to be. The Chronicle was outraged, not by Clare's treatment, however, but by the way Morgan and Thompson kept waiting to die. Gallows Hill is still consecrated land and will never be built upon. Up ahead now, still on the right and partially hidden amongst the trees, is a tall red brick building, very much in the style of a fairy tale castle. This was once the home of the writer Thomas Hughes, best known as the author of Tom Brown's School Days. As a member of the legal profession, Hughes moved to Chester in 1882 as a county court judge, and had this beautiful riverside mansion built, naming it Uffington House after the small town in Berkshire where he was born in 1822. Today, Uffington House has the distinction of being one of the few 19th century riverside properties to remain a single private dwelling. Just coming into view now are what appear to be some elegant Georgian townhouses. Known as Dee Terrace, they were actually built by the Victorians. Diva, meaning divine one or goddess, was the name given by the Romans in AD 43 to the city of Chester, in honour of the Celtic goddess of the river which we know today as the Dee. Almost immediately, and still on the right-hand side, we come to Grosvenor Park, a 20-acre plot of land given to the people of Chester in the 1860s by Richard Grosvenor, the second Marquess of Westminster, with the defeat of Napoleon. The following year, when Napoleon suffered his final decisive defeat at the Battle of Waterloo, the people of Chester celebrated once again with another regatta. Cambridge didn't hold its first regatta until 1829, while Thames-on-Thames, generally regarded as Britain's principal rowing event, lagged way behind, only holding its first regatta in 1839. The large and elegant houses on the left-hand bank were built in the mid-1900s and make up the suburb of Queen's Park. In 1852, a private pedestrian suspension bridge was built to link the suburb with the city centre and the church of St John the Baptist on the opposite bank. The estate agents of the day made much of the bridge in their efforts to entice wealthy Victorians into buying homes in the newly built suburb, stating that, unlike the old Dee Bridge further downstream, the new bridge was toll-free, and for those wishing to attend Sunday service, the church was just a 2-minute walk away at the end of the span. And indeed they spoke the truth. However, in the best tradition of estate agents throughout the ages, only the positive aspects of life in Queen's Park were taught on during their sales pitch, and no mention was ever given to the fact that the bridge was actually closed on a Sunday. The present bridge replaced the original in 1923. This area of the river is known as the Grove, owing to the grove of lime trees you can see planted all along the right-hand bank. The funding for the planting of these trees was provided in the 1800s by Charles and Susanna Brown, founders of Chester's prestigious Brown's department store. Ahead of us now in the distance is the Old Sea Bridge. The original bridge was built by the Romans, but between 1279 and 1280, the timber carriageway was washed away during high tides and floods. In 1387, major rebuilding work was completed, and it is likely that this work resulted in the bridge which is present today. In 1828, the bridge was widened for pedestrian traffic, and in 1868, tolls were finally abolished. Just before the bridge is Chester Weir. To the right of the weir is the UK's only example of a weir gate. This unusual feature is a single low-level lock gate set into the weir, which can be opened to provide extra draft for boats to pass up or downstream on spring tides once the water levels on each side have equalised. The weir was built for Hugh Lucas or Hugh d'Avranches in 1093 for the Benedictine Abbey of St. Werburgh, to provide a constant head of water to power their corn mills downstream on the right-hand side. The mills were demolished during the early part of the 20th century.